Mafia boss found a bleeding female cop on the street. What happened next shocked the entire PD. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. The night was thick with rain, the kind that seemed to weigh the very air down, turning every sound into a muffled echo. Streets that were usually bustling with life now lay empty, the dim streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. The rhythmic patter of rain hitting the pavement was interrupted by the screeching sound of tires skidding, a sudden crash breaking the stillness. In an instant, the quiet street became a scene of chaos. A black SUV, its sleek frame gleaming under the streetlights, had slammed into something, a body. The figure was sprawled on the ground, blood mixing with the rainwater pooling around her. A woman, her uniform unmistakable. She was a cop. Her breathing was shallow, labored, as if every breath she took was a struggle. Her face was pale, her body trembling from shock and the heavy loss of blood. As the man in the black suit stepped out of the SUV, his eyes locked onto her. He wasn't just anyone. He was a mafia boss, someone whose very presence sent ripples of fear through the city. His sharp gaze swept over the scene, assessing, calculating. The street was empty, save for the few stray cars passing by, unaware of the life-and-death struggle happening just a few feet away. The woman's body was cold to the touch, but her chest still rose and fell with each desperate breath. The mafia boss moved quickly, his long strides bringing him to her side in an instant. His hands, steady and practiced, reached down, his fingers brushing over her wrist to check for a pulse. It was weak, but it was there. He didn't hesitate. He scooped her up effortlessly, his strength surprising as he carried her to the safety of the SUV. The entire time, his eyes remained locked on her face, his expression unreadable. "You're not dying tonight," he muttered under his breath. Inside the car, the woman's body was laid gently across the back seat, her head resting against the leather. She was still unconscious, but the blood loss had slowed. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. The mafia boss, who had ordered countless hits and made ruthless decisions, found himself suddenly uncertain. This wasn't a threat he could eliminate. She was a cop, and yet, in her vulnerable state, she had become something else entirely, a person he needed to protect. His mind raced as he gave instructions to his men, his voice low but urgent. "Get us to the mansion now. Make sure no one follows us." As the car sped through the streets, the mafia boss's mind kept returning to one thought. How had it come to this? A cop, bleeding out on the street, and him, the feared mafia boss, now responsible for saving her life. What would happen next would shock everyone, including the police department. But for now, he focused on one thing: keeping her alive. The sound of the engine hummed steadily as the black SUV sped through the rain-soaked streets. The woman, her face still pale and her breath shallow, lay motionless in the back seat, a blanket now covering her. The mafia boss's eyes never left her, even as the city passed by in a blur. His thoughts were racing. This was a cop, a person who had spent her life serving the law, and now she was at his mercy. Yet, despite everything, he could not shake the feeling that this wasn't just an accident. There was something else, something deeper. He looked down at her blood-stained uniform, and for the first time in years, he questioned his own actions. This wasn't about power, or control, or fear. This was about something different. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging over him. They arrived at the mansion, the towering gates slowly opening as the car approached. The place was silent, cold, and imposing, the kind of place that felt more like a fortress than a home. Inside, the mafia boss carried her into a room that was as luxurious as it was sterile. He laid her down on a plush bed, the room lit only by the soft glow of a chandelier overhead. His men had followed them in, but they remained silent, watching their leader with wary eyes. He was not the kind of man who showed weakness, but something about this situation had unsettled him. He had seen many things in his life: deaths, betrayal, crime, but never had he been faced with saving someone who was so far removed from his world. He stepped back, looking down at her again, his mind still spinning. "Get the doctor," he ordered sharply, his voice betraying none of the doubt that filled him. A few minutes later, a physician entered, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. The doctor moved to the bed, immediately beginning his work. "She's lost a lot of blood," the doctor said, examining her injuries. "We need to get her stabilized, but she'll need a transfusion." The Mafia boss watched from the doorway, his arms crossed. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Should he just let her go? Let her fade away in the anonymity of the night, like so many others who had crossed paths with him? Or should he take a different path? The doctor moved quickly, preparing what he needed to help the woman, his movements efficient and practiced. It was clear he was used to working in these kinds of situations, where time was of the essence. As the doctor worked, the Mafia boss's mind drifted. He thought back to the moment when he first saw her. The way she had fallen in the street, the desperation in her eyes as she fought for consciousness. He had not planned on this. None of this had been part of his plan. But now, as the doctor worked to save her life, he realized that he could not just walk away from this. This woman, this cop, had somehow become more than just a casualty. She had become a symbol of something he didn't understand. The doctor stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel, his face grim. "She's stable for now, but she's going to need time. A lot of time." The Mafia boss nodded, his mind already shifting to the next phase of this unexpected situation. "Keep her here," he instructed coldly, "and make sure she's guarded. No one can know she's here." "Not yet." His men nodded and dispersed, but the Mafia boss remained in the room, staring down at her. His thoughts were conflicted. He had always been a man of action, a man who took control. But here, in this moment, he was unsure of the road ahead. What was he doing? Why was he helping her? He couldn't explain it. He didn't even want to try. But as he turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him, he knew one thing. The decision he had made tonight was going to change everything. The woman in the bed had been a cop, a symbol of the law, yet she was now tied to him in a way he couldn't fully understand. He had saved her, but at what cost? The Mafia boss didn't have the answers yet, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The world of crime was one that he controlled, but this woman, in her silence and vulnerability, had somehow shifted the power dynamic. And he didn't know how to handle that. Days passed, and the rain seemed to never stop. It was as if the heavens themselves were mirroring the turmoil inside the Mafia boss. He watched over her with a kind of detached care, a cold precision that he reserved for everything in his life. The woman, still unconscious, lay in the guest room, her body hooked up to N4 and other machines that monitored her condition. His men, always at the ready, stood guard outside her door, keeping the mansion under lockdown. No one could know she was here. No one could know what had happened. The thought of her being a cop still weighed heavily on his mind. He had taken risks before, but this was something else. What had started as a fleeting encounter, a mere accident, had turned into something he couldn't escape. A life was in his hands. He had never been in a situation like this, and the power he wielded in the underworld felt small in comparison to the responsibility he now had to this woman. Days stretched into nights as he continued his routine, but something kept drawing him back to her. He couldn't stop thinking about her face, the way her eyes had pleaded for help before she lost consciousness. He had seen countless faces before, but none had made him feel this, conflicted. He didn't know what to do. He was a Mafia boss, and she was a cop. She represented everything he had fought against his entire life. And yet, when she had looked at him that night, something had shifted. He had seen not a cop, but a person in pain. The doctor came and went, offering updates, but his words didn't seem to matter. She was stable now, but still unconscious, and the chances of her regaining full health were uncertain. The Mafia boss found himself in the room with her more and more, watching over her in silence. He'd asked the doctor about her recovery, not that he truly understood the intricacies of medical terms, but he needed to know. He needed to know what would happen next. One evening, as he stood by her bedside, he saw her stir. Her hand twitched, and then her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she was disoriented, confused. The room was foreign, and the smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness overcame her, and she collapsed back onto the pillow. "Easy," a deep voice said, but it wasn't harsh. It was calm, almost soothing. She blinked, And there he was, the Mafia boss. His face was just as intense as she remembered, but there was something different in his eyes. Something softer. "You're awake," he said, his voice low. She didn't respond at first. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened. She was on a bed. Her body felt weak, her head pounding. Her uniform was gone. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Her mouth felt like cotton. "Water," she croaked. Without a word, he reached for a glass of water on the nightstand, his movements fluid and precise. He brought it to her lips, letting her sip. She drank greedily, her hands trembling as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. "Where am I?" she finally asked, her voice still hoarse. "You're safe," he answered simply. "You're in my home." The words sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't been expecting that. She remembered the accident, the pain, the blood. But nothing prepared her for this. She looked around the room, trying to get her bearings. It was luxurious, far too opulent for someone like her. The furniture was grand, the decor high-end. She was in a mansion, but that wasn't the most important thing. "Why am I here?" she asked her, gaze locking with his. He didn't answer right away, studying her as if he was trying to decide something. Finally, he spoke, his tone more serious than before. "You were hurt. I saved you." She wanted to argue, to ask him why he had done it, but the words caught in her throat. The truth was, she was exhausted. Her body was drained, and despite the shock of being here, her mind was struggling to keep up. She had no idea what was happening. "Why did you help me?" she whispered, the question almost as much to herself as to him. He seemed to consider the question for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost reluctant. "Because you needed help," he said simply. She couldn't understand him. This man, this Mafia boss, had just saved her life. But why? What was he after? Was this some kind of trap? She had so many questions, but she couldn't bring herself to ask them just yet. "I need to go," she said, her voice firmer this time, as she pushed herself up in bed. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she had to leave. She couldn't be here. Not like this. He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "Not until you're better." The words sent a shiver down her spine, and for the first time since waking up, she felt a flicker of real fear. He wasn't letting her go. He had no intention of letting her leave. The room felt suffocatingly quiet as the Mafia boss watched her carefully. The woman, still weak from the injuries she had sustained, lay in the plush bed, her eyes scanning the room as if she were trying to assess the situation. She had never been in a place like this before. It was strange to her, too grand, too much like a world she didn't belong to. She had no idea what was happening, but what she knew for sure was that she couldn't trust him. He was a Mafia boss, and she was just a cop. She had never believed in fate, but being here, in this room, surrounded by the opulence of a criminal's world, made her question everything. She still hadn't fully processed the events from the night before. Her memory was foggy, but she knew enough to understand that he had saved her life. The question, however, was why? Why had he done it? She was nobody to him. The Mafia boss was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his dark eyes watching her every movement. He seemed calm, composed as always, but there was something unsettling about the way he was staring at her. "You're going to be fine," he said softly, though his tone had an edge that made her uneasy. She glanced at him briefly before speaking, her voice raspy. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. The Mafia boss stepped into the room, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Because you're alive, and I don't leave people to die," he said simply. His words were cold, detached, yet there was an intensity behind them that made her pause. "You didn't have to save me," she shot back, her voice gaining strength despite her weakness. "You could have just left me there." He stared at her for a moment, and then he smiled, though it was not a kind smile. It was a smile that spoke of secrets, of power, and of things that she would never understand. "Maybe," he said, "but I didn't. And now you're here. Safe." She was still struggling to process everything, her mind racing with questions that she didn't have the answers to. Why had he saved her? What was he going to do with her now? He was a criminal, and she was a cop. It didn't make sense. She wanted to ask him more, but her body was still weak from the blood loss. Her head was spinning, and the pain in her side was relentless. As much as she wanted to fight him, to demand answers, she knew that she couldn't. Not yet. She needed time to think, to understand the situation she was in. The Mafia boss stepped closer to her bed, his gaze never leaving her face. "You don't trust me, do you?" he asked, his voice low and almost amused. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He was right. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. She was a cop, trained to believe that people like him were the enemy. But here she was, lying in his bed, unable to leave, unable to escape. "I understand," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "You think I'm just another criminal, that I'm only interested in power, in control. Maybe I am. But right now, I'm more interested in keeping you alive." His words hung in the air, thick with tension. She wanted to argue, wanted to lash out at him, but something in the way he said it stopped her. Maybe it was the way he seemed so certain, so calm. Or maybe it was because, deep down, she knew that he was right. She had been saved by someone she should fear, someone she should despise. And now, she was at his mercy. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. She wanted to break it, to say something, anything, to regain some sense of control, but she couldn't. She didn't know what to say. The Mafia boss seemed to sense her unease and took a step back. "You need rest," he said, his voice softer now. "You're safe here. You're not going anywhere until you're better." She didn't respond. She couldn't. What was there to say? He was right. She was stuck here, and she had no idea what would happen next. The Mafia boss turned to leave the room, but then he paused. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice almost gentle. "You'll need it." As he closed the door behind him, she closed her eyes and tried to relax, though the uncertainty gnawed at her. She was alive, yes, but at what cost? She had no answers, only questions. And the man who held them all, the man who had saved her life, was someone she couldn't trust. She just didn't know why yet. Days turned into weeks as she lay in the mansion, confined to a room she didn't want to be in, surrounded by luxury that felt so out of place. She had barely spoken to him since that first night. The Mafia boss, however, had kept his distance too, watching her from afar. He would visit her once or twice a day, just to check on her progress, but his eyes always lingered just a little too long. It was as if he was waiting for something, or maybe he was still figuring out what to do with her. She was still recovering, her strength coming back slowly. Each day felt like a battle. Her side ached, her head pounded, and the memories of that night kept flashing through her mind. The accident, the blood, the way he had come to her rescue. Why? Why had he done it? She knew who he was, a mafia boss, a man of violence and power, someone who had probably left a trail of destruction in his wake. And yet, he had saved her. Why? She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the mystery. But it wasn't just the mystery of why he saved her. It was the mystery of who he really was. She had seen glimpses of a side of him that she didn't expect, tenderness in his actions, a certain care that didn't seem to belong to a man like him. But she couldn't trust it. She couldn't trust him. Not completely. One afternoon, after a long stretch of silence, the mafia boss came to her room again. This time, there was something different in his demeanor. He wasn't just checking on her, or at least, that's not what it felt like. There was something urgent in his eyes. "You're better," he said simply, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. It had been weeks since she'd last felt truly like herself, and even now, her body still felt weak. "I'm still not ready to leave," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. It was true. She couldn't even imagine what it would take for her to walk out of here. She didn't belong in his world, and she sure as hell didn't trust him. But something about his presence made her feel trapped. "You're not leaving yet," he replied, his voice steady, unwavering. "Not until we're sure you're fully recovered." She wanted to protest, to demand her freedom, but she knew better. He wasn't going to let her go that easily. She had no idea what he wanted from her, but she knew he wasn't the kind of man who let people walk away from his world without some kind of price. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. "What do you want from me?" He stepped closer, the air between them thick with tension. "I want nothing from you," he said, his eyes not leaving hers. "But you owe me something." She raised an eyebrow, not understanding. "Owe you something?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "You saved my life," he said softly, his gaze unflinching. "I'm not asking for anything in return, but I will need your help." Her mind raced as she tried to process his words. "Help? What kind of help? He seemed to think for a moment before answering. There are things in my world, things that need to be handled. And I need someone who can do things my way. She didn't understand. You want me to help you with what? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he just gave her a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. You'll find out soon enough, he said cryptically. She felt a chill run down her spine. The unease she had been feeling since waking up here only seemed to grow with each passing day. This wasn't just a matter of saving her life. This was about something much bigger, something she didn't fully understand yet. And the more she stayed in this house, in this man's world, the more she realized she wasn't just a pawn in his game. She was being pulled deeper into his world whether she liked it or not. The Mafia boss turned to leave the room, but before he did, he looked back at her. Rest up, he said. We'll start tomorrow. She watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, what would happen if she couldn't find a way out? The following morning, she woke up to a strange stillness. The mansion was unnervingly quiet, the only sounds being the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant echo of footsteps in the hallways. Her body still ached, but the exhaustion of the past few weeks had lessened. She slowly sat up, the sheets slipping off her and pooling around her waist. Her thoughts were racing. She had barely spoken to him since that night, since he saved her. The Mafia boss, who had become an enigma she couldn't escape, had done something no one else had ever done. He had shown her kindness, but only in the most detached way. She could still feel the coldness in his presence, the silent power that emanated from him like a force she couldn't understand. She was caught in his world now, and the more she stayed here, the more she realized that there was no way out unless. He decided it. After taking a long, quiet breath, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet making contact with the cold marble floor. The feeling of the cool surface sent a jolt of reality through her. She wasn't in a hospital. She wasn't in some clinic recovering from a wound. She was in his mansion, a place she couldn't leave without his permission. And that thought sent a wave of frustration through her. She had always prided herself on her independence. Now, it felt like it was slipping away from her. As she stood and made her way toward the bathroom, she passed the window and looked outside. The gardens were vast, stretching out in front of her like a maze she could never navigate. She didn't know how long she had been here, but it felt like forever. Her reflection in the mirror was pale and unfamiliar. Her body was still healing, but it wasn't just the physical wounds that bothered her. It was the mental toll of being trapped in a world she didn't understand. She splashed some cold water on her face, willing herself to calm down. When she looked up, she saw the reflection of him in the doorway, standing silently, watching her. His presence was imposing, as it always was. "You're up early," he said, his voice low and steady. She turned to face him, trying to hide the frustration she felt bubbling up inside. "I can take care of myself," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. He didn't seem fazed by her tone, his expression unchanged. "I'm sure you can," he replied. "But you're not leaving this house until I say so." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. She wanted to argue, to scream, to demand her freedom, but something in his gaze stopped her. It wasn't that he was threatening her, not directly at least, but there was an authority in his eyes, something that told her he wouldn't back down. He wasn't afraid of her defiance. He was used to people obeying him. "I need you to help me," he continued, his voice calm, like he was stating a simple fact. "There are things I need done, things that you can do." She crossed her arms, not willing to give in to him so easily. "And if I don't want to help you?" she asked, her tone defiant. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then I'll make sure you regret it," he said, his words soft, but they carried a weight that sent a chill down her spine. She stared at him for a long moment, trying to read him, trying to understand what he was really asking of her. "I'm not your servant," she snapped. "I'm not your pawn in whatever game you're playing." He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "You're not my pawn," he said calmly. "But you're here now, and I need you, whether you like it or not." The silence between them stretched on for a long while. She felt a mix of anger and helplessness, emotions she wasn't used to feeling. This man, this Mafia boss, had so much control over her life now, and it made her sick to her stomach. But despite everything, despite her desire to leave, she knew deep down that there was no escaping him. "What is it that you need me to do?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more resigned. He seemed pleased by her shift in tone. There's a lot going on in my world, he said, his voice still cool and calculating. And I need someone who knows how to keep secrets. Someone who can do things that others can't. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. She didn't know what he was asking for, but she had a sinking feeling she wasn't going to like it. And if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. He didn't hesitate. Then you'll never leave this house. And you'll regret it. His words were so final, so cold, that she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle in her chest. He wasn't playing games. He meant every word. I'll think about it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. Good, he said, before turning to leave. I'll be back later. Don't keep me waiting. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone once more in a world that felt like it was closing in around her. Days passed since their conversation, and with each one, the tension between them grew. She had spent most of the time locked in the room, as if confined not just by the walls of the mansion, but by the reality of what she had gotten herself into. The Mafia boss's words echoed in her mind, playing over and over again like a haunting melody. You're not leaving until I say so. He had made it clear. Her choices had narrowed down to one. Either work with him or remain here, a prisoner in her own mind. At first, she had resisted, hoping for a chance to escape, to get away from him and his world. But she soon realized that no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she plotted to run, there was nowhere to go. She had been caught, not by her own doing, but by fate and the strange, cruel twist of destiny. As the days wore on, the fear she had once felt began to shift into a mixture of frustration and reluctant curiosity. There were things about him she didn't understand, things that, despite her better judgment, drew her in. She could see the way he handled situations, calm, precise, and always in control. He wasn't like the criminals she had dealt with before. This man was more dangerous, more calculating. Yet there was something that made her wonder if there was more to him than the ruthless Mafia boss everyone feared. She couldn't help but feel that there was a human side to him, one that was hidden behind a mask of power and intimidation. That thought made her question everything. It was a cold morning when he visited her again, stepping into her room with that same imposing presence. She had been sitting by the window, staring out at the rain, trying to think of a way to break free from this strange prison. But when he spoke, his voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. I'm giving you a choice, he said, his voice steady and unyielding. She turned to face him, her heart racing. A choice? What kind of choice could he possibly be giving her? She had no choice. I've made it clear that I need you, he continued, his eyes locking onto hers. But if you're not willing to help me, then you can go. The choice is yours. She stared at him, her mind spinning. Could it really be that simple? Could she really leave? He was offering her an out, a way to escape his world. But something inside her told her that if she walked away now, she would be leaving behind more than just a life she couldn't escape. She would be walking away from something she didn't fully understand. I'm not afraid of you, she said, her voice firm, though doubt crept into her words. You should be, he replied, his tone never changing. But this isn't about fear. It's about what you want. She wanted to believe him, to trust that there was more to this than just manipulation, but she couldn't. She had seen enough of his world to know that there was always a catch. There always was with people like him. But as he stood there, watching her, she couldn't help but wonder, what if he's telling the truth? What if he really did just want help, not because he needed her, but because he couldn't do it alone? What do you need from me? She asked, finally breaking the silence. He stepped closer, his presence more intense than before. I need someone who can keep their mouth shut. Someone who knows how to move in the shadows, to get things done quietly. You've seen how the world works. You understand what needs to happen behind the scenes. She could feel the weight of his words settling over her, each one heavier than the last. She was no stranger to the dark side of the world, to the things people would do to survive, but this was different. This was personal. And if I refuse, she asked, already knowing the answer. Then you stay here, he said simply. But you won't be free. She swallowed hard, trying to push down the growing anxiety in her chest. He had her in a corner, just as he had planned. There was no way out unless she did what he asked, unless she became a part of his world. The thought made her stomach churn, but she knew it was the only way. "I'll do it," she said quietly, the words leaving her mouth with an unexpected sense of finality. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to get involved in his world. But she had no choice. She couldn't stay here forever, locked away in a room, afraid to make a move. "Good," he said, his lips curling into a thin smile. "I knew you would." He didn't wait for her to say anything else. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, feeling more trapped than ever. She had made her decision, and now she had to live with it. The question was, what would it mean for her in the end? The following morning, the air felt colder than before, and the reality of the situation sank in deeper. She had agreed to work for him, the Mafia boss, a decision that made her stomach churn every time she thought about it. She was standing on a precipice, one step away from falling into a world that was darker than she had ever imagined. But she had no choice. As much as she hated to admit it, she knew that leaving wasn't an option. She had made the deal, and now there was no turning back. The Mafia boss didn't waste time. He had already begun involving her in the operations, though he kept her at arm's length, not revealing much about the true scope of his empire. Each day was the same. She would wake up in the luxurious room he had put her in, unsure of what the day would bring. Some days, she would be tasked with mundane tasks, delivering messages, coordinating logistics, or running errands. Other days, she was expected to stay out of sight, hidden away as his world of crime and secrecy played out behind the walls of his mansion. Her role in all of this was unclear, but one thing was certain. He trusted her to keep quiet, to do his bidding without question. But it wasn't just the work that kept her awake at night. It was him. The Mafia boss was a man of few words, but when he spoke, there was an authority in his voice that made everything else fade into the background. There were moments when she caught him looking at her, moments where his gaze lingered just a little too long. She could feel the tension between them, the unspoken questions and emotions that hung in the air. The more time she spent in his presence, the more confused she became. She didn't know what to make of him. Was he truly the monster everyone said he was? Or was there more to him, a side hidden beneath the cold exterior? She had seen glimpses of something else, a side that was unexpected, even vulnerable. But she knew better than to trust him. He was a Mafia boss, and she was a cop. She couldn't afford to get too close. The days blurred together, and then one afternoon, he summoned her to his office. She walked in, her heart beating a little faster than usual, but she tried to steady herself. She couldn't show weakness, not to him. He was sitting behind a massive desk, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of a desk lamp. His face was unreadable, as it always was. He motioned for her to sit, and she did so reluctantly. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "You've done well so far," he said, his voice low. "But we need to take things to the next level." She stared at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease swirling in her stomach. He looked at her for a long moment, as if assessing her, before leaning forward slightly. "I need you to be more involved," he said. "There are things happening, things that require someone with your skill set." Her mind raced. She knew she wasn't just a secretary or a courier in this world. She had been chosen for a reason. But what was that reason? What was he planning? She felt a pang of fear, but she refused to show it. "What kind of things?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing as if considering how much to reveal. "Things that involve power," he said at last. "Things that can change everything." She didn't know what he meant, but the weight of his words pressed down on her. She had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing compared to this. She was playing a game she didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "I want you to help me make things happen. I want you to help me take control of the city." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. She stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. She had made the decision to stay, to play his game. But she hadn't known what that would entail. She hadn't known she would be asked to be part of something so dangerous, so powerful. But now it was clear. He wasn't just asking for help. He was making her a part of his world. And there was no going back. "Are you ready for that?" he asked, his eyes piercing hers. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yes." she said, though she wasn't sure she believed the word herself. She had agreed to stay. She had agreed to help him. But she hadn't known it would come to this. She wasn't just his employee. She wasn't just his pawn. She was a player in his game. And the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. The following days blurred into each other, a confusing mix of routine and tension. She had agreed to help him, to enter a world she had sworn to fight against, and now there was no turning back. He had made it clear, she was his, and there was no room for hesitation. The Mafia boss had given her a role, and while it wasn't fully defined, it was clear that he needed her for more than just her knowledge. He saw something in her, something useful. She could feel it, the weight of her decision pressing down on her every moment. She wasn't sure whether she was playing his game or if he was playing hers. But the choice had been made. The work started small. It wasn't glamorous. She ran errands, delivered messages, and sat in on meetings where she felt more like a ghost than a participant. He watched her closely, as if studying her every move, and she found herself looking back at him, trying to make sense of the man behind the reputation. He was as cold as he was calculating. He didn't say much, and when he did, his words carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. She knew he was dangerous, but what she hadn't expected was the subtle kindness that occasionally slipped through his armor. She had seen him act with care when it came to her, ordering special meals when she wasn't feeling well, checking on her recovery, even making sure she had privacy when she needed it. It was strange. She had never seen this side of a man like him. Yet, no matter how much she tried to rationalize it, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him. One evening, after a particularly tense day of sitting through a series of quiet meetings, he pulled her aside. The room was empty except for the two of them, and the door clicked shut behind him with an almost final sound. He stared at her, his eyes intense as usual, but this time, there was something else there, a flicker of something, almost like hesitation. "You've done well so far," he said, his voice low, but with a strange undercurrent of approval. She nodded, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "But I need more from you," he continued, stepping closer. "I need you to understand the bigger picture. You think you've seen it all. You haven't." She swallowed, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady, though her insides were a storm of uncertainty. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the window, his back to her, staring out at the city below. The lights of the city flickered, casting shadows across his face. "I've built something here," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "A dynasty. And I'll be damned if I let anyone tear it down." She wasn't sure what he was trying to tell her. He had already made it clear that he was ruthless, but there was something about his words now that seemed different. His empire wasn't just about money or power. It was something much deeper. "I need loyalty," he added, turning back to face her, his gaze sharp. "Loyalty that goes beyond just doing what I ask. I need someone who understands that everything I've built is at risk, and I need someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to protect it." She stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. This wasn't just about her helping him with a few tasks anymore. He was asking her to be more than just an ally. He was asking her to be part of something bigger. "What are you asking of me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer, and for a moment, she could feel the weight of his presence, the power that seemed to radiate from him. "I need someone who will stand by me when things get dangerous," he said. "Someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." She felt her chest tighten. She had been expecting this. She had known that if she stayed in this world, she would be asked to compromise. But this was different. "And if I refuse?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. He stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Then you leave. But leaving means you'll be walking away from everything. And I don't think you want that." He wasn't threatening her, not directly, but the implications were clear. There was no walking away from this world once you were in it. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had agreed to help him, but now, as he laid out his expectations, she realized that there was no turning back. She was in this world, whether she liked it or not. She couldn't be the person she had been. She couldn't just walk away. "I'll do it," she said quietly, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. She didn't know what she was agreeing to, but she knew she had no other choice. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing her response. "Good," he said, his lips curling into a small smile. "I knew you would." And with that, The moment passed. He turned and left the room, leaving her standing there, alone with the decision she had just made. What had she just agreed to? What had she just stepped into? The next few days were a blur. She had agreed to help him, and now there was no turning back. The Mafia boss had his own brand of power, and she was now a part of it, whether she liked it or not. She was no longer just a cop, but something more complicated. She had entered a world she didn't fully understand, one where decisions weren't made lightly, and where loyalty meant survival. Every day, she woke up to the same cold luxury, the same towering walls, the same oppressive silence. But each day also brought something new, a new assignment, a new task, a new way of seeing the world through the eyes of a man who had built an empire of fear. She had learned to adapt. She ran errands, collected information, kept her head down, but the closer she got to him, the more she saw how deep the web stretched. The Mafia boss was a man of mystery, someone whose every move was calculated, and yet there was something about him, something she couldn't quite place, that made her uneasy. He was everything she had once stood against, and yet there were moments when his actions seemed to suggest otherwise. One evening, after another long day of menial tasks, he called her to his office. She had come to expect these meetings. They were never particularly warm, but they were always intense. She entered the room, her heart racing, unsure of what to expect. He was sitting behind his desk, as usual, his posture rigid, his eyes sharp. The moment she stepped inside, his gaze flicked up to meet hers. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice calm but commanding. She did as he asked, keeping her back straight, trying to maintain some semblance of control. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating. She wasn't sure if she was waiting for him to speak, or if he was waiting for her. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low. "You're more capable than I first thought." She raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice steady, though she was growing curious. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with a look she couldn't decipher. "It means," he began slowly, "that I think you're ready for the next step." Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure what that next step was, but she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "What are you asking of me?" she asked, her voice a little shaky despite herself. The Mafia boss didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a file on his desk, flipping it open and sliding it toward her. She glanced down at the papers, her eyes scanning the information. It was about a rival gang, a group that had been encroaching on his territory. She knew this was bigger than her usual tasks, bigger than anything she had ever been asked to do before. "I need you to go to their operation," he said, his voice firm. "I need information. I need to know what they're planning. And I need you to get close enough to do that without raising suspicion." The weight of his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She could feel the pressure building inside her chest. This was no longer a simple job. This was something dangerous. The stakes were higher than ever before. She looked at him, trying to keep her composure. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His eyes hardened, his lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Then you'll have no purpose here," he said. "And you'll be out of my world for good. I don't need people who hesitate. If you're going to do this, you need to do it fully." She felt a chill run down her spine. He was right. She had already stepped into this world, and there was no walking back now. She had made her choice, and now she had to follow through. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt heavy in her mouth, but she knew they were true. She had no other choice. She had to prove herself, to herself and to him. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said, his voice colder than before. "I'll have everything arranged. You'll be meeting someone soon. They'll brief you on the next steps." She didn't ask who the person was. She didn't need to know. All that mattered was the job. And as she turned to leave the room, she felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. This was it. The world she had once fought against had now become the world she was a part of. She didn't know how far she would go, but she knew one thing. There was no turning back. The next few days felt like a constant blur of preparation and tension. She had agreed to do his bidding, but the weight of the decision settled heavily on her shoulders with each passing hour. He had assigned her a task that she knew was risky, dangerous even. She could feel the walls of the Mafia boss's world closing in around her, and for the first time since her arrival, she realized how truly trapped she was. The plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate the rival gang's operation, gather intel, and get out. But as she sat in the back of a black sedan that night, on her way to meet the contact who would give her the details of her mission, she knew it wouldn't be that easy. The streets of the city were quiet, the shadows playing tricks on her as she stared out of the window, watching the neon lights blur past. She had always been good at staying focused, at doing her job, and keeping her emotions in check, but tonight was different. She was stepping into the unknown. As they approached a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city, her heart began to race. The place looked like something out of a movie, grimy, unkempt, and ominous. The kind of place where deals went down under the cover of darkness. She was met by a man who didn't say a word, just nodded and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a photo of the man she was supposed to meet and a brief description of his role within the gang. No names, no further details. Just enough to get the job done. She tucked the envelope into her coat pocket and walked into the building, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with the smell of grease and old machinery, and the atmosphere felt heavy with the kind of tension only criminal organizations could create. As she moved through the shadows, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead of her. She was walking a thin line, and if she made one wrong move, it could cost her everything. Inside the warehouse, she found the man she was looking for. He was sitting at a table, flipping through paperwork with a bored expression on his face. He didn't look up when she entered, as if he had been expecting her. "You're late," he said, his voice low and gravelly. She didn't respond, just took a seat across from him and waited for him to make the next move. He slid a folder across the table to her. "Everything you need is in there," he said. "The boss wants this done quickly." She glanced down at the folder, her fingers itching to open it, but she knew better than to rush things. She had been trained to remain calm, to take her time, and to make sure every detail was perfect. She opened the folder slowly, taking in the information inside. It was all there: names, locations, and most importantly, the plans for the next big shipment the gang was expecting. The Mafia boss had been right. This was the intel he needed. She looked back up at the man, her mind already racing through the possibilities. This could change everything. If she could get back to him with this information, it would give him the upper hand. But there was still one problem: getting out without being caught. "What's the next step?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. The man gave her a small smirk. "You follow the plan. You do your job, and we take care of the rest." Simple, right? Simple, she thought to herself. But nothing about this was simple. As the man stood up and left the room, she felt her stomach twist. She had what she came for. Now, all she had to do was leave. But as she made her way toward the exit, she realized that getting out was not going to be as easy as she thought. The moment she stepped outside, the night air hit her like a cold slap. She felt a presence behind her and turned to find two men standing in the shadows. They were watching her, their expressions unreadable. Her heart skipped a beat. She had been set up. They knew she wasn't one of them. They had to. She had no choice but to act quickly. The cold metal of her gun pressed against her side as she moved to make a run for it. But before she could take a step, one of the men spoke. "We know who you are," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're not going anywhere." The words froze her in place. They had been watching her the whole time, waiting for the moment to strike. She was trapped. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out, but she knew she didn't have much time. There was only one option left. She reached for the gun, ready to fight her way out, but before she could pull it out, a voice called out from behind her. "Enough." The two men turned, and she did the same, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing in front of her, silhouetted by the dim streetlight, was him, the Mafia boss. His cold eyes met hers, and for a moment, she couldn't read him. Had he known about this all along? Had he set her up? "Get them out of here," he said calmly, and the two men stepped aside, allowing him to pass. He looked at her for a moment, as if assessing her, before speaking again. "You did well. But this is just the beginning." She nodded, still trying to process everything. She had gotten the information, but the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. And now, standing face to face with the Mafia boss, she realized just how deep she was in. The days following her confrontation with the Mafia boss felt like a whirlwind, the weight of the situation heavier with every step she took. She had done what he asked, gathered the intel from the rival gang, But the moment she had handed over the file, she realized just how deep she was in. There was no going back. The Mafia boss was more than a powerful figure in the underworld. He was a man who controlled every aspect of his world, and now she was part of it, whether she liked it or not. That night, after the incident outside the warehouse, she had been left to think, left to process everything that had happened. She wasn't sure if she felt fear or a strange sense of powerlessness. She had once been a cop, someone who fought against men like him, but now, she was doing his bidding. The walls of the mansion felt even colder as she sat in her room, staring out at the darkened streets. She had been raised to believe that people like him were the enemy, but here she was, caught in his web. She couldn't deny the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her chest. He had asked her to work for him, to gather information, to be a part of something she had spent her career trying to dismantle. But as much as she hated to admit it, there was a part of her that was drawn to him. His cold efficiency, his control. She hated it. She hated that she was starting to understand him, that she was starting to see the world through his eyes. The very idea of it made her stomach turn. But the more she tried to fight it, the more she realized that there was nothing she could do. Her world had changed the moment she stepped into this mansion, and she couldn't escape it. The Mafia boss had made it clear that she wasn't just a pawn. She was important. She had a role to play, whether she wanted to or not. The knock on her door broke her from her thoughts. She straightened up, heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. When she opened it, she found one of his men standing there. "He wants to see you," the man said, his tone as cold as ever. She didn't say anything, just nodded and followed him down the hallway. Every step felt like it was taking her deeper into his world. The door to his office was ajar, and as she walked in, he looked up from the papers on his desk, his gaze locking onto hers. "You did well," he said, his voice calm and steady. There was no hint of approval in his words, just acknowledgement. "But this isn't over." She nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "What now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Now, we make sure the other side knows that we're not to be underestimated," he said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. "You're going to meet with someone. They'll give you the next set of instructions. You'll do exactly what they say." She frowned. "Who am I meeting?" "Someone who can make things happen," he said cryptically. "You'll know what to do when you get there." She wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but she knew better than to question him. She had already made that mistake. "I understand," she said, though she didn't fully understand. The meeting felt like another step into the unknown, another task she would have to complete to stay in his good graces. "You'll leave in an hour," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "Don't keep them waiting." She nodded again, turning to leave. As she walked out of the office, her mind raced. The Mafia boss was playing his game, and she was just another piece. She had no control. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, but she pushed it aside. This was her life now. This was the path she had chosen, whether she liked it or not. The drive to the meeting location was short, the city streets flashing by in a blur of lights and shadows. When the car stopped in front of an unmarked building, she could feel the tension in the air. She stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting her skin. As she walked into the building, she was met by a man in a dark suit. His eyes flicked over her once before he spoke. "You're here for the job," he said, his voice smooth and businesslike. She nodded, not speaking, unsure of what to say. He handed her a small envelope. "Inside is everything you need to know. Get it done." She took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hand. It was cold, much like the man who had handed it to her. She could feel the eyes of the men around her, watching, waiting. She knew she had no choice but to complete this task, but the question lingered in her mind. What happens after this? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't let herself think too hard about it. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. With the envelope in her hand, she left the building, ready to follow the next set of instructions. But as she stepped into the night, the weight of the world seemed to settle over her, the reality of her situation becoming all too clear. She wasn't just in his world now. She was becoming a part of it. It had been weeks since she first stepped into his world, weeks since she had agreed to do his bidding. Every task he gave her felt like another step deeper into the darkness she had sworn to fight against. The more she worked with him, the more she realized that there was no easy way out. The Mafia boss had become a constant presence in her life, his demands unyielding, his expectations clear. She was no longer just a cop. She had become a part of his operation, a cog in his machine. She had thought that completing the tasks would give her clarity, would make her feel like she was taking control of the situation. But instead, she felt more lost than ever. The day had arrived when everything would come to a head. She had done everything he asked, gathered information, infiltrated the rival gang, and played the role he had carved out for her. Now, the time had come for the final act. The Mafia boss had called her to his office, his expression unreadable as he looked up at her from his desk. "You did well," he said, his voice calm. There was no warmth in his tone, just the usual cold precision. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The weight of what was to come pressed down on her chest. "But now it's time," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Time to take control." She didn't know what that meant, but the unease in her stomach told her it wasn't good. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension building inside her. He stood up, walking over to a nearby cabinet and pulling out a folder. He handed it to her without saying a word. She opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. It was a plan, a detailed strategy to take out the rival gang once and for all. She recognized the names, the locations, the people involved. Everything they had been working toward was in this folder. This was it, the final push. She had known it was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. "We do this tonight," he said, his voice colder now, harder. "You'll lead the operation. You'll be the one to carry it out." She looked at him, trying to process what he was saying. He was asking her to cross a line she had never crossed before, to become something she had spent her entire career fighting against. He was asking her to become his partner in crime. The weight of the decision was suffocating. She had done everything he asked, but this was different. This was crossing a line that she couldn't take back. "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking as she finally allowed herself to speak the truth. He didn't react at first, just watched her with that same cold, calculating gaze. "You're already in this world," he said softly, his voice almost sympathetic. "You've been helping me, and you've done a good job. But now you have a choice. You either follow through, or you walk away. But walking away means leaving everything behind." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had no idea what was worse, the thought of walking away from him or the thought of going through with it. She wasn't sure what to do, what was right or wrong anymore. She had never been this close to the edge, never been this uncertain. But deep down, she knew there was no going back. The life she had known, the person she had been, was slipping away with every decision she made. "What happens if I do this?" she asked, her voice quiet. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "You become part of this world," he said, his tone almost gentle, as if he were trying to reassure her. "You become someone who has the power to make things happen. You become someone who can take control." She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she was ready for that kind of power, that kind of responsibility. But as she stared into his eyes, she realized something. She had already crossed the point of no return. The moment she had agreed to work for him, she had already made her choice. This was the price she would have to pay. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now, though it felt like a heavy weight in her chest. He nodded, his lips curling into a small, approving smile. "Good," he said. "We'll begin immediately." She didn't feel relief, didn't feel anything except the sinking feeling that she was becoming more and more like him every day. But it was done. The decision had been made. As she followed him out of the office, ready to carry out the final act, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen to her once this was all over. She didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain: she was no longer just a cop. She was part of his world now, and there was no going back. "I have been drawn into a world of danger, power, and passion in this dark romance, where every decision I make only pulls me deeper into the grasp of a ruthless mafia boss." This dark romance tells the story of a woman caught between her duty as a cop and her dangerous involvement with a man who commands fear and respect. The more she tries to stay away from his world, the more she realizes there is no escape. With each passing day, her role becomes more pivotal, and the stakes rise higher as she is asked to make choices she never thought she would. Will she be able to maintain her integrity, or will this dark romance turn her into something she swore she'd never become? In a world where loyalty is everything, The Mafia boss offers her a path to power, but at a cost. As secrets unfold, the line between love and betrayal becomes impossible to distinguish, and the woman must decide if she can trust the man who saved her life, or if his intentions are far darker than she ever imagined. This dark romance will keep you on the edge of your seat, questioning what's real and what's manipulation, as the connection between these two grows more intense and dangerous. Every moment spent in his world is a step deeper into a dark romance where passion and danger collide, leading to an unpredictable conclusion that will leave you breathless.